Hello, hello. Thank you so much for tuning into this soft-spoken ASMR true crime video. Today we are going to be doing the disappearance case of Stacy McCall, Suzanne Streeter, and Sherrill Levitt, also known as the Springfield 3. I apologize, I've been slow making videos. I'm really tired from work. I've recorded 2 videos, but I felt like it was too breathy, so I don't know if I'll upload. Okay, so we are talking about the case. It occurred in Springfield, Missouri. So we'll start with the background of the women. Sherrill Elizabeth Levitt was born November 1st, 1944. She was from Bellevue, Washington. She was described as being assertive, hardworking, and a caretaker. She got married to her first husband, Brent Streeter, in 1964. The next year, the couple had a son, Bart. In 1973, Sherrill gave birth to their daughter, Suzie. Not long after Suzie was born, Sherrill and Brent divorced. In 1980, Sherrill married her second husband, Don Levitt. The couple moved to Springfield, and 6 years later, they got a divorce. Following the divorce, Sherrill struggled initially, but she worked really hard on her own and was able to buy herself a home in the nice area of Springfield. Her son Bart was older and was moved out of the home, so this house was a fresh start for her and her daughter Suzie. Suzie was born Suzanne Elizabeth Streeter. She was born March 9th of 1973. Suzie wanted to follow her mother's footsteps to become a hairdresser. She was described as being very outgoing, fun, happy. Some of her friends said they suspected her having maybe OCD. She had repetitive habits. She really was regimen. She would park her car like in the same place at her house every single time. Stacy Kathleen McCall was born April 23rd, 1974, to Stu and Janice McCall. She has 2 older sisters. Stacy was described as being funny, bubbly. Her nickname was Spacey Stacy. She intended to join Southwest Missouri State University. Stacy and Suzie became friends in 2nd grade. They naturally grew apart and ventured into different friend groups by the time high school started. Suzie went into the popular group and dated like a bad boy, and Stacy hung out with the goofy, funny crowd. In June of 1992, the girls graduated high school together from Kickapoo High School. Suzie was 19 and Stacy was 18 at the time. Their graduation took place on June 6th, and the graduation ceremonies ended around 4 p.m. And that's when Sherrill, Suzie's mother, leaves the celebration and plans to return home to work on the house and do some refurbishing. This is the last time she is seen. Both Suzie and Stacy plan to celebrate their graduation by the best way I know how, going to a series of parties. They plan to then drive to the area of, I guess, Branson to go to a water park they were planning on going to the next day. Stacy's mom is like, maybe don't drive down at night. She was concerned of getting into a car accident. Just didn't feel like the safest option. So the Stacy and Suzie attend those series of parties, and then they land at their friend Janelle Kirby's home. And after some reconsideration, they plan to spend the night there and drive to the water park in the morning. So Stacy calls her mom around 10:30 and says, "Don't worry, we're not going to go tonight, and we're going to drive in the morning." And she promises to call in the morning before they head out. As the night progresses, the home becomes very crowded, which results them in once again rethinking their plans. Suzie's like, I got this brand new king-size waterbed. Why don't we sleep in my place and then we can go to the water park in the morning? They are last seen at around 2 a.m. on June 7th, leaving the party to go back to Suzie's home. They both drove separate cars to the residence. Sherrill, Suzie's mother, was last heard from at around 11:15 that night while on the phone with a friend painting some drawers. The next morning on June 7th, Janelle began making a series of phone calls to her friends since they had agreed to meet up the next day to drive to the water park. Around 12:30, after not hearing anything back from them, Janelle and her boyfriend decide to drive to Suzie's home. The first thing they notice when they arrive is there's shattered glass on the front porch. It looks like the porch light was smashed on the outside, and it may have been that the bulb was intact, which is kind of weird. So I guess trying to be polite, the boyfriend sweeps up the glass. They knock on the doors, there's no answer, so they go inside where it's empty. There's no other indication that something's wrong, except for Suzie's dog Cinnamon is freaking out, crying, barking. While in the home, apparently Janelle answers the phone twice. Both times are strange, sexual phone calls from a masculine voice. She hangs up and the calls are not recorded. This time they're calling friends, trying to see if anyone has seen the women, and no one has heard or seen any of them. Later in the day, Stacy's mom, Janice, becomes increasingly worried about her daughter. She said that Stacy was known for calling and letting her parents know where she was. Her mom eventually finds out through Janelle's sister that Stacy had not spent the night at Janelle's home, but instead went to Suzie's. So then her mom begins calling Suzie's home, but there was no answer. On the evening of June 7th, 1992, Janice, Stacy's mom, jumps into her car and drives over to the residence herself. When she initially pulls up to the home, she says she feels a sense of relief because she sees all 3 of the cars parked in a circular driveway. Her mom was not the only person that had come to the home at that point. There had been other friends that had come to check in and see if they were there. One of Suzie's friends said that she immediately noticed something was wrong when she came to the home because Suzie's car was not parked in her usual spot. Suzie usually parks in the carport, and as we said before, she almost always parked in that spot. So her friend kind of thinks maybe somebody was parked there when she came in. Inside the home, the lights are off and the TV is on. It's like the fuzzy screen when you finish a movie or a show. Like a VHS, not Netflix, obviously. According to Stacy's mom, the home looks nice and neat, and there's no sign of a struggle. There is something that is alarming to them. All 3 of their purses are lined up neatly on the floor of the living room. All of their personal belongings are inside, including a $900 deposit Sherrill had in her purse, and also her cigarettes, which she never left without. Her mom, Stacy's mom, didn't call 911 because that would mean an emergency, and at that time she thought they were going to walk in that door any minute. So while friends and family wait, they begin to clean up all over the place. They even fix a dented window blind. The phone rings and the machine picks up a message that has very lewd sexual content. Thinking it was a senior prank, they delete this message. As the night goes on, everyone begins to panic over where they are, and the police are called. The Springfield police almost immediately show up and pretty much say, this is a missing persons case, and there is a suspicion of foul play. They want to start with the house and treat it like a crime scene, but that has a lot of difficulty because of that mass community cleanup that happened previously. So there's no hair, blood, DNA, and that phone call that could have been a possible lead was deleted from the machine. By the time police arrived, 15 to 20 people had been through the home, cleaning, moving around. This, it's the 90s. I think, like her mom said, you don't really expect the worst. And I guess if you feel rude to be in someone's home, even though you're worried, you want to still be polite, so you clean up You don't want them to hear a creepy message, but that is obviously a big downfall in this case, unfortunately. By Wednesday, June 10th, more than 20,000 posters were hung throughout Springfield. Some of these posters still remain in storefronts today. Community-wide searches were conducted. Divers inspected Lake Springfield and some of James River. And investigators ran polygraph tests on all those close to the women. It is believed at some point between 2:30 and 4 a.m., all three women were at the home. And it did appear that the women had slept in their beds. So at this point, police began to dig deeper in the background of the women. This is something that was reported in some places, but not all. And it was a part of an interview with Stacy's mom, but I'm sus. They apparently discover in Suzie's room books that hinted towards satanic things and devil worship. Like I said, I'm always suspicious about these reports. It could have just been one of those weird things teens do. I don't know, they're really weird. Sometimes it doesn't have any other depth except for where they are in their life. So I don't take those as serious, but it was reported in some places. But what is true is that Suzie was dating that bad boy who actually had quite a criminal record. He was a part of a group that robbed graves. They actually went in and would take gold teeth out of skulls. They did other crimes similar to that. Suzie was really disgusted by this behavior, so she broke up with him. There's some suspicion that she may have been the one to turn them in for the crime, and she had even agreed to testify against the group in a trial. What is sus is this trial was only a few months away from the disappearance. When police talked to the young men, they all deny any involvement in these disappearances, and without any DNA or evidence, there's nothing linking them to the case. 2 weeks into the disappearance, they receive a call that a person reported seeing Suzie or someone looking like Suzie driving an older model avocado green pale van the morning she went missing. This van was seen 2 miles away from the home. This person reports she feels Suzie looked scared, and she also claims that she could hear a man yelling from the back seat with some kind of threat to keep driving, and it was threatening. Police begin to stop vans close to the description, and they even paint a van green and keep it outside the police department out in public to spark anyone's memory to help in the investigation. This lead ends up being a dead end. A few more calls come in. On June 15th, 1992, police released this composite sketch that had been reported in the area of an unidentified man with long hair and a full beard. In the days leading up to the disappearances, the neighbors report seeing this man near the home. On June 24th, 1992, a waitress at George's Steakhouse, which which happened to be one of Suzie and Sherrill's favorite restaurant, told police she saw 3 women at a diner between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. She said that the waitress looked and could see that Suzanne appeared intoxicated and that her mother was trying to calm her down. On January 2nd, 1993, an anonymous individual called the America's Most Wanted program, appearing to hold prime knowledge in the women's disappearance. But the call was cut short when the switchboard operator tried to patch it through to the Springfield investigators, and the call was dropped. A tip also comes in from Florida, which indicates Robert Craig Cox had some possible involvement in this case. Robert Craig Cox was a highly trained Army Ranger who was voted Soldier of the Year, which is an interesting award I didn't know existed. He was charged and sentenced to death for the brutal murder of 19-year-old Shireen Seller in 1988. Since there was no evidence tying him to the case, it was reversed and he was handed over to authorities in California, where he was convicted of abducting 2 women and he served 9 years. He's also had other possible involvements in other cases and other charges. So the connection to the women and Robert is he worked at the dealership where Stacy's dad worked. And he had moved to Springfield only weeks before the disappearance. Police bring him in for questioning. His answers are really sketchy and don't really match up. So he says, I was with my girlfriend's family that night of the 6th, and then we went to church the morning of. And then his girlfriend confirms that alibi and is like, yep, we were in church together on the 7th. I don't know. I guess you just, when it comes to alibis, you go with it, but I always feel like, I don't know, it's his girlfriend. The validity of her alibi. But again, there was no evidence or any kind of DNA to be able to hold him, so they let him go and keep an eye on him and continue looking at other leads. So at this point, every possible lead or angle turns up nothing. Then a creepy little familiar face pops up again, and Robert Craig Cox is arrested in Texas for aggravated assault. At this time, his girlfriend is now recanting her statement, and she says, I actually had no idea where he was during the time of the women's disappearances. So he's currently serving time in Texas, and when this happens, a reporter goes down to Texas hoping to get an interview with Cox for any information about these disappearances. During the interview, Cox says, I know they're dead. I'll say that. It's not just my theory, I know that. He claims he won't give any specifics until his dear mother passes, which I feel like it's a little too late. You're in jail and you've had a pretty shitty record. I think your mom knows you're not a Boy Scout. He never says anything specific enough to help the case, and so he just remains this floating person of interest. After countless tips and calls, there's been no leads in this case that have provided any kind of answers or closures. It has been 30 years since their disappearance. There are some theories in this case, and we will just start off with the weirdest one. Why not? In 2007, a crime reporter by the name of Kathy Barrett investigated a tip from a psychic that there were bodies buried underneath the foundation of the south parking garage at Cox Hospital. That's kind of ironic. It's Craig Cox and then Cox Hospital. It's not related, but she brings this info to the police, who don't really have anything they can do with this tip. So she takes it upon herself to hire some dude with some high-tech penetrating radar that can find graves underneath concrete, which is very specific. She claimed ground-penetrating radar identified 3 areas in the correct size and shape of a burial site. This dude is like, oh yeah, that's what I see when I go over graves. And my question is, why are you going over graves? Anyway, the validity of these claims have been scrutinized by skeptics because there's a lot of people who claim that radars cannot detect in such an environment. But the police do come out and say this does not add up because it's a year after the disappearances that they began construction on the parking structure. And it's a stretch to imagine that, even if someone had buried the bodies in that location prior to construction, when they started it, they would have excavated the area, dug up the ground, and most likely would have discovered the bodies. So Kathy gets interviewed by Crime Watch Daily, and she's in the interview and she's saying what she feels happens when all of a sudden it takes this weird turn. She begins to say oh yeah, I believe I know what happened. They were killed before morning and the target wasn't Stacy. At this point she shuts down and is like, I'm not going to talk any further about who the killer is. The interviewer's like, okay, why are you doing this interview if you have information and you're not sharing it? And Kathy's like, I feel like their story needs an ending. And the producer of Crime Watch comes in and he's like, why are you being weird and talking in code? To which she's like, well, I live in Springfield. I'm afraid for my safety. I've been boxed in by cars before. I've received threats, and I've been advised to leave this case alone. And then she's like, I believe there's a reason this case hasn't been solved. Who knows? It's an interesting interview, and you just get these weird vibes that she's I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. Another theory, that there's multiple theories, but one suspect is Bart Streeter, which is Suzie's brother and Sherrill's son. He was, I believe, 27 at the time, and actually earlier in that year, in 1992, Suzie stayed with him. I guess they were kind of trying to reconnect, but they had gotten into an argument, so Suzie moved out and moved back in with her mother. Apparently, both Suzie and Sherrill weren't really on good terms with him, but he had an alibi and passed a polygraph early on in the investigation, and he's been cleared of suspicion. Some more suspects are Dustin Reclow, Michael Clay and Joseph Riedel. Dustin was the ex-boyfriend to Suzie. He, obviously had that questionable reputation. He was a known drug user and was recently arrested for the grave robbing. They had these connections to the Galloping Goose Motorcycle Club. And they were known for violence and crime. So, again, in February of 1992 that year, Sherrill was asked to testify against her ex-boyfriend and his friends regarding the potential use of her car in the grave robbery. So they were out on probation for these crimes, but when they look into these 3 young men, again, there's no evidence tying to them. They volunteered to talk to the police and they provided alibis, but they are still possible suspects. There's also some floating theories on Sherrill's ex-husbands. There's nothing to link them to the crime as well. And I feel like it'd be a stretch, especially her first ex-husband is the father of Suzie. I don't think that'd be a lot. Another angle is that it's a complete stranger or someone unknown in this case. So one angle is that Suzie was not always home on the evenings, so there might be a possibility that Sherrill was targeted and that she was the intended victim. I think a lot of people try to figure out who was the intended victim. That's a helpful way to see what suspects there are. So sometimes I think in these cases it's who was that victim and who kind of was there at the wrong time. So if Sherrill maybe even had someone over that night, since she thought she had the house to herself, again, there was that friend who thought it was very suspicious that Suzie's car was not in the same parking spot that she always parked in, which could have meant that someone else might have been parked in that spot before the girls got home, and when they arrived, she couldn't park there. It feels like they did get to go home and change and get themselves together for the night. So, there wouldn't be maybe an immediate crisis when they came into the door. I also kind of thought about the car, and I feel like too another possibility is I feel like maybe Stacy would have driven behind Suzie and followed her there. But maybe Stacy pulled in first and then Suzie couldn't get into her normal spot. But it is, something to think about. Another thing is maybe somebody that Suzie and Stacy interacted with at the parties or at night and during that night or earlier in the day maybe had targeted them personally and then followed them home after the party. And then there's this other angle that a original investigator theorized, that maybe the women's assailant took Cinnamon out of the yard during the overnight hours of June 7th in an effort to gain access to the residence. So this officer speculated that, maybe the attacker or attackers knocked on the door pretending to have rescued the dog after it had wandered away from the home. He said that maybe one of the women opened the door to retrieve Cinnamon and was overpowered by the assailant. So the friends and family are still hoping to find answers. The city has never forgotten about them and will never give up trying to find out what happened. Almost every year they hold an event in memory of the women. The most recent one was actually on June 7th, 2022. I think Stacy's mom may have recently had a heart attack, but is okay, and has been recovering from that, but I just feel so much for this family. So the Springfield Police Department labeled the case as a cold case. If anyone has any information about the disappearance, I encourage people to call. So you can call the police department at 417-864-18110. Sherrill would be 77 years old today, Suzie would be 49, and Stacy would be 48. I have heard about this case a lot. I really don't know what happened. It's so challenging with no DNA evidence, nothing to know what happened. It's a lot. I think it's such a case that's well known because it's 3 women who went missing. Let me know if you have any kind of theories or any opinions. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you are having a good day or good night, and I hope you have a good day tomorrow, and I will see you in my next video.